Thank you for joining us. We continue to study our People in the Book series, and as I was reflecting on the title of our series, I was asking myself, who are the people in the book? And actually, they are not so different from you and me. You will not notice some of them if you were to find them at your local grocery store, or they did not have a superstar status with thousands and thousands of followers. And as I was trying to find common ground between them, um, I was saying, well, they all are from the people of God, but I remember that people like Ruth or Rahab are not originally from the people of God. So um, you could say, well, they share the faith in God. Well, some of them didn't actually believe in God until they didn't start believing in God until later on. So, like Ruth, for instance. So, here is the only thing I can find that they all share. They are men and women, through whom God accomplished great acts of salvation of behalf of his people. Uh, from David to Rahab, from Judah to Barnabas. I will say that people in the book come in different sizes and shapes, and they come from different backgrounds. Some of them are royalty, others are priesthood, some of them are from noble birth, but like our character tonight, some of them are not. So I decided to focus on Hannah. Now, why Hannah? Well, why not? I think there are some striking and very interesting principles that we can learn from her story. So let me introduce you to Hannah, and I'm going to be reading 1 Samuel chapter 1, the first four verses, and I'm reading from the ESV. There was a certain man of Ramathaim Zophim, of the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah the son of Jeroham, son of Elihu, son of Tohu, son of Zaph, an Ephrathite. He had two wives. The name of the one was Hannah, and the name of the other Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. So according to 1 Samuel chapter 1, Hannah lived in a very interesting time for Israel. Now, the books of Samuel are an opening, I will say a transition. When you read Judges and when you read Ruth, you have the time of the Judges. And when you finish reading the first book of Samuel and you read the second book of Samuel, you have the established monarchy under King David. So there's a time of transition going on. At the same time, it is a time of national crisis. I will say Israel is facing crisis on two fronts. On the one hand, there is an internal crisis because the house of Eli, the priest, is very corrupt. So they do not provide the leadership that God's people need. So there is an internal crisis, the lack of national leadership. On the other hand, I will say there is also an external crisis because the Philistines and their superior power and armies are a constant threat for Israel. So, on the one hand, you have an internal crisis. I will define that as a lack of national leadership. The time of Moses, the time of Joshua, that time is long gone. It has become like a legend. It's a myth by now. And Israel at this time, when we are reading First Samuel chapter 1, is a loose federation of tribes. Um, and so, as you read First Samuel chapter 1, you could be wondering, well, and where is God in the middle of this crisis? Can someone please just call him and let him know that we need him? We need him to come and rescue his people. It is in this context that Hannah, a nobody, um, comes into play, and she has a big role to play in First Samuel chapter 1. Remember, she will flesh out the pages of the story of Israel between the fall of the judges and the rise of the monarchy, between that phrase in the book of Judges that says, um, in those days when there was no king in Israel, everyone did what was right in his own eyes, which doesn't sound too different from today, actually. That time, and the establishment of the house of David over Israel. So, um, what I would like for us to do as we move forward in our study tonight is to take a quick look at Hannah in the following way. When we study the people in the book, or when we study the Bible and we learn about someone, we usually try to see what they did right, and we try to imitate it in our life and in our context today, to see where they fail, the things they did wrong, and avoid all of that. But one lesson I have learned in the past year since COVID hit is that we humans do not learn by watching other people's experiences unless it happens to us. So I say that because the common approach that some people have when reading the Bible or reading about people in the book is, well, God has a plan for everyone. He has a plan for you, He has a plan for her, He has a plan for every single human being. Indeed, God has a plan, God has a project, but only one, not one for every human being. From Genesis to Revelation, God's project remains the same: the consolidation of all things in heaven, on earth, and under the earth, under the lordship of Jesus Christ, so that at the name of Jesus every knee shall bow. Therefore, I want you to consider the alternative. And the alternative is, how does this particular person, how does this particular character fit? They fit into God's project of redemption. So, with that in mind, I want us to see the story of Hannah under that light. And the first thing I would like for you to notice is her name, Hannah. In Hebrew, names have a meaning, and her name means charming or attractive. Her family drama unfolds before us as readers. She is the first wife of Elkanah. Yes, that may sound weird, but in this patriarchal society, monogamy was not yet established as the norm, and men could get as many wives as they could afford because women were considered property. And the main purpose of that property was to birth children. So if they cannot function in that way, then there's not so much attractiveness in a woman like that. So even though her name is charming or attractive, maybe that's the reason why Elkanah got a second wife, because he does not find her that charming. She cannot give him a male child, a male heir. So there is tension in the family because the second wife, Penina, and her name in Hebrew also has a meaning. Can you guess what that meaning is? Yes, you got that right. Her name means fertile or prolific. So she threatens and bullies Hannah. Just like remember in Genesis, Sarah and Hagar and Rachel and Leah. Now, in this time, the wives did not live under the same roof. No, that would be atrocious. So they did not live under the same roof. They did not live in the same tent. But the husband spent time in one place during the week. Then, whenever he wanted, I will guess, he moved to the other. And so, can you imagine Elkanah saying, I'm taking you on a date tonight, fertile. Let's have dinner together, prolific. What do you think Hannah, the charming and attractive one, feels when she hears things like that? So, what would you do if you were Hannah? Where do you go uh, just to put an end to this anxiety? So, Hannah goes to plead her cause to the God of armies at Shiloh, at the tabernacle, the sanctuary. This God of armies might also remember a distressed, childless woman like Hannah, and her request is straightforward. When she prays to God, she asks for a male child. No girl, a male child. It had to be male. One lesson here is that we need to be straightforward and detailed in our requests to God. So God remembered Hannah, and our God is a God who remembers. The same verb remember is used of God's acts of salvation for his people in other places in the Bible, like in Genesis chapter 30, speaking about Rachel, or in Exodus chapter 2, speaking about Israel in bondage in Egypt. So God remembers you, God knows you, He sees your struggles, He is um, attentive, he pays attention to your struggles. He hasn't forgotten you, He remembers you. He will. This is, there's hope. He will remember you, He will deliver you. And through Hannah's firstborn, Samuel, God will remember his people once again because Samuel provides that so much needed leadership. And he too will become a prophet, the last of the judges and the anointer of the first two kings of Israel. If this is a story of God's grace for Hannah and for Israel, I think it can also be the story of God's grace for us. The books of Samuel begin with a salvation story. New life comes out of barrenness. Hope rises from hopelessness, and despair and grief are transformed into thanksgiving and praise. So we too can learn from the story of Hannah about the dynamics of grace that might transform our futures and address the forms of hopelessness and pain that we face. Yes, in the last year, we have seen and we have experienced a lot of hopelessness and pain. So, I would like to share three brief lessons to sum up our study. We can learn from Hannah the importance of expressing our need before God. I say this because I think sometimes we are more focused on presenting a portrait of the strength of our faith than in openly confessing our struggles, our anxieties, and our pains. Like social media, you will see only the pictures that will make us look good. If not, well, there are filters for that. So we admire positive thinking and feeling, goal setting, problem solving, and the like. And we think that what we do externally will make us feel better internally. Now, when I'm saying that, I'm talking about our need for God or spirituality. Hannah recognized that wholeness in her life lay beyond the things she could not control, so she learned to rest in God alone. I want to invite you. to learn to rest in God alone. Second, we can learn from Hannah the bold persistence required to claim God's grace. Yes, boldness. Hannah boldly asked God to remember her. She believed that God's grace was available to her. She was judged as a drunk by Eli. The bold and the passionate claim that God's justice and deliverance is a promise for all people, regardless of their background. I wish, my brothers and sisters, this is my wish. I wish you could be as bold in sharing your faith as the society and media around us are bold in sharing their agendas through every available platform. You need to be bold. Finally, the proper response to God's grace, to His gift of grace, is give it back. Do not keep it as your precious possession, for if we attempt to keep it as a possession, we will lose it. Can you imagine asking God for a child, a male child, only to have him, to give birth to him, and then to dedicate him for God's service for life, away from you, to not be able to watch him grow, to develop teeth and natural things that parents like to see their child developing? So, when grace brings new life, when grace brings new life, we too must give back of the grace we have received, not other grace, but the same grace we have received. This will include worship, of course, offering, service. But the idea is that what was asked must become what is lent back. Now let me ask you, what grace have you received from God? I'm not talking about salvific grace alone, for grace has different meanings in Scripture. Are you holding on to what God has given you as if it were yours? As if it were your most precious possession? Even our lives are not ours. Give that grace back into God's service. Thanks for watching. May God bless you.